Whoa! This is a different set. I know, there's change. I'm out of state currently, and if you're wondering where I am, check out Tailosive Talks. I'll post my travel vlogs there. But yeah, in the meantime, we're gonna put a pause on the skits just because I'm traveling and time is a bit more limited for the next week. But if you don't like this setup, if you don't like this background, don't worry, it's not permanent. And no, it's not a green screen. But without further ado, let's talk about the Pixel design scheme for a second. So I've hated on the Pixel for quite some time. You know, I've complained about their software being too buggy and them being hypocritical with which lenses are important. You don't need a dual camera. You don't need an ultra-wide lens. Oh, okay, yeah, we'll just put all three on them, whatever. And while the Google Tensor chip was a huge disappointment, I want to give credit where credit is due because you guys seem to watch me for some reason, and I'd like to think it has a bit to do with my personality and my honesty. And if I have to remain completely honest with you guys about how I feel about the current iPhone design and what the future of the iPhone has in store, I'll have to admit that Google has honestly come up with a bit of a camera design for the back of the Pixel 6 that we've known about for a while now, and thanks to Google leaking their own products, we now know that the Pixel 7 is going to carry that design, now accommodated with an eye hole. But this camera bump, I honestly think, is quite genius. In fact, it's something that Apple probably should copy, and I know they'll probably get memed for it, and they'll likely get a lot of criticism for it, but I would like to make my case in today's video as to why I think this is such a good idea. And I know many of you disagree, but just shut up for a minute, I don't care. So first of all, a lot of you are probably asking, like, why change the camera design at all? iPhones are iconic, and with more and more phones blending together, you know, they're all kind of going with the squared off edge design, and everyone likes little bezels, so you just have the same size bezel all the way around the phone, and you either have a notch at the top or an eye hole or a hole punch camera. In fact, the iPhone 14 and the iPhone 15 are probably gonna accommodate for camera hole cutouts instead of notches, and once we get cameras and Face ID underneath the display, aren't all phones gonna look the same? Basically, the only way to tell phones apart from each other is gonna be the logo and the camera design, because the front is all just starting to look the same. And yes, from the beginning, the iPhone has always had the camera in the exact same place. They put it in that top left corner, and yes, it's grown quite a bit. You know, with the iPhone 6, we were introduced to the camera bump and thought, man, I hope they get rid of that, and Apple did not care at all and decided to continue to expand the camera bump every single year until now. And based on the leaked schematics of the iPhone 14 series, it sounds like the camera bump is getting even wider, even thicker. And that's because Apple doesn't care too much about the camera bump and the wobble that a phone has on a desk, but they care about making the camera better because as smartphones all start to blur together, camera improvements is basically the only improvement you can make after a certain point, other than, okay, the battery life is a little bit better, okay, the display is a little bit brighter. So cameras are taking up an increasingly large amount of Apple's iPhone presentations, so they're comfortable with it getting bigger. In fact, they might even like the fact that the camera bump is so big, because that kind of gives the illusion to customers and smartphone buyers that, ooh, this one's got a beefy camera, this is so big, it must take great pictures, right? Well, most of you have gotten very comfortable with the iPhone, 11, 12, 13 camera design because you're used to it now, Like, I remember when the leaked renders of this kind of triple camera where all the lenses were equal distant from each other first came out, everyone thought it was disgusting, they thought it was horrible, and they thought, no, Apple's just going to continue with their stoplight design of the iPhone 10 series. But no, those leaks ended up being right, and even though they were horrifying at first and everyone hated it, did not impact sales, and now most people are pretty fine with it. You don't hear people complaining about the camera layout on the back of their iPhone because, again, we just kind of got used to it. And the iPhone 13 camera design is diagonal, which at first everyone thought was weird and bizarre, and then it happened, and now everyone's used to it again. So I personally think it's naive to assume that the camera design for the iPhone will continue to stay the same forever, at least the layout and arrangement of lenses, because if there's anything Apple's been consistent on, it's doing things we didn't expect. No one really expected or anticipated the notch, and no one really anticipated the eye hole, but that's something Apple kind of continued to go with. And while it's not happening with the iPhone 14, we know that from conversations Apple's had going on with camera suppliers that maybe with the iPhone 15, or if that gets delayed, perhaps the iPhone 16, they eventually want to adopt a periscope lens on the iPhone, right? A big lens that has to be built kind of sideways into the phone because of how long it is, but it should help dramatically with zoom. You're able to get an optical zoom of 10x or 50x or maybe even more with digital enhancements, but Samsung's been doing it for a while, and the writing's on the wall. Eventually, Apple will want to put in a pretty beefy periscope lens. And if you know about the iPhone camera design layout right now, you're well aware that a periscope lens, which is going to take up a lot of space, and that's part of the reason Samsung has designed their phones with camera bumps and lenses that are so stretched out, because they're accommodating for that big periscope lens on the inside. And as more and more iPhones start to look the same from the front, I think having more differentiating design features on the back would be beneficial to them, because people would be able to know, oh, this is the newer iPhone, you have the 15, you have the 16. And here's where the Pixel design scheme comes in, because Google, of course, had all kinds of different camera layouts over the years, but once they got to the Pixel 6, they found a way to have a camera bump, because there's just so many advantages to having one, but also eliminate the wobble on the back, which is honestly probably one of my biggest complaints with the iPhone 13 Pro Max. And even with everyday consumers, like, I'll hand my phone to people that are curious about it, and they notice how large and how obnoxious the camera bump is, to the point they're like, hey, yeah, when you set this down on a table, it starts to wobble, you know, it doesn't sit flat. The Pixel 6 camera design eliminates that. If anything, it provides Face ID with a little bit of an advantage, because it tilts the phone upward a little bit. So if you're using your phone sitting at a table, it's not a huge advantage, but the Face ID sensors would be able to read your face a little bit better because of that angle, and because of how wide iPhones already are. If you accommodated that camera bump into that whole visor approach, to where it's taking up the entire back, you would have so much room internally to work with periscope lenses, ultra-wide sensors, and the main sensor, of course, to all be built into that one visor. And I know that many of you are probably thinking, well, most people use a case on their phone and that eliminates the wobble. Not always the case, especially with the 13 Pro models, and it's going to get increasingly worse with the 14 Pro models. Even when you get cases on these phones, the camera bump will often still protrude even that. So not everybody wants a super thick case on their phone. So I think it's safe to say that the camera bump is here, it's gonna stay, it's not going anywhere, despite the crazy rumors about Apple ditching it on the iPhone 14 last year. Yeah, I never believed that was gonna happen, but if we have to have a camera bump on our phones, I think we should implement it in the most elegant and space-effective way possible. And keep in mind, with this design pitch I'm making about Apple just kind of stealing the Pixel camera design, which is honestly really smart and very clever, it's allowing Apple to make the camera bump bigger, not smaller, which is what most people are advocating for. Find a way to shrink it or make the whole phone thicker. No, I'm saying keep your camera bump, let it be thick, let it be wide, so that you can pump it full of awesome camera features like the periscope lens and wider sensors, larger sensors for 8K ProRes recording. Do whatever you want with the camera, but with this design scheme, you can eliminate the wobble, which impacts people with and without phone cases, and it will be a very easy and recognizable way to tell, oh, they have the latest iPhone, which Apple, I know you care about that. Will a lot of people think, oh, it looks like the Pixel now? Probably in the tech community, a few people will be annoyed by it, but there were other Android phones in the world that had camera designs very similar to that of the iPhone 11, 12, and 13, long before the iPhone came out. But once Apple started doing it, you know, they have their own giant fan base, and there weren't a bunch of people saying, hey, is that like a Huawei phone? No, because it's got the big old Apple logo on the back, and Apple's not going to get rid of that. So because the Pixel sells at so much lower volume, I don't think the general public will get confused. End of the day, they'll still know it's an iPhone, but this would be a tremendous camera enhancement. And even though I don't plan on upgrading to the iPhone 14 this year, fixing the camera bump in the future would honestly very much tempt me in upgrading. That and USB-C. But Apple's very unlikely to do both of those. This is just kind of wishful thinking on my part. But ever since we got continuity camera in macOS Ventura, I'm a little bit convinced that Apple must be watching my videos and taking some of my advice. As unlikely as that sounds, I'm just going to keep wishing for things, and hopefully they happen, and then I'll take credit for them, right? Because honesty. Let me know what you guys think of the iPhone camera design in the future. Do you still just want to stay on the camp of Apple should get rid of it, or do some of you weirdos out there like it? All that good stuff. Let me know what you're thinking down in the comments below. This is your Apple Sheep here, and I'll see you over on Tailosive Talks.